Hey everybody, in this video we're talking about fiscal policy and specifically automatic stabilizers, okay? Automatic stabilizers are a situation where our budget has been constructed in such a way that if we go into boom times, the budget is going to adjust to provide contractionary forces upon the economy, that it's going to try to restrain the economic growth. And if we go into bust times, the budget's going to adjust so that we are more stimulative, that it stimulates the economy. Now, to understand that, I think it is very important that students understand the amount of fiscal stimulus that we are doing, they should associate with the size of the government's deficit, okay? Actually, I want to do it this way right here. The size of the government's deficit. Now, let me tell you what the government's deficit is. It's a situation that the government outlays are more than the tax revenues. So, government outlays, tax revenues, that difference between the tax revenues and the outlays is the size of the deficit, okay? Now, if the tax revenues actually got more than the outlays, we would have a surplus. So again, government outlays, tax revenues, that difference is the deficit. If that deficit widens, we're becoming more stimulative. If that deficit shrinks, we're becoming less stimulative. And again, if we ever have a surplus, the tax revenues getting above those outlays, we're definitely becoming contractionary in our fiscal policy. And here's the big thing. As the economy changes, as I said, that budget is going to adjust in a way to provide what we call countercyclical forces. If we boom, it's going to become less stimulative or contractionary. And if we bust, it's going to become more stimulative. To understand that, I'm using this graph. One of my favorite graphs in economics that we don't always teach. Let me run through it really quickly. It takes a little bit to get your head around, but once you do, it's pretty simple. First of all, we've got dollars as our unit of measurement on both axes. Here we're measuring real GDP, of course, in dollars. And you can see what I'm doing here is I'm going to show us in a recession, our actual output is going to be less than our full employment output, right? I've got that full employment output being here and our actual output there. So I'm going to show an economy running in a recession or being in a recession, right? Now here again, dollars is the unit of measurement, and then we're measuring tax revenues as represented by that line right there. And as you can see, as real GDP grows, the tax revenues go up. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the government outlays, okay, government spending and transfer payments, as that economy gets bigger, actually government outlays decrease, okay? And I'll be talking about that in just a second. But let's start with the tax revenues first. Why do they increase as the economy gets better, okay? Because our major taxes, at least at the federal level, are sales and excise taxes, okay? Mainly excise taxes, not a whole lot of sales at the federal level, but then corporate profit taxes, payroll taxes, and income taxes. And for all of those types of taxes, payroll, corporate profit, and income taxes, as the economy gets better, corporate profits go up, the number of people on a payroll go up, and income goes up, we get more tax revenues. So you can see those tax revenues increasing. And also we have more sales, and therefore we have more revenues from excise taxes also. Now, on the government outlay side, we really want to think about transfer payments, and we want to specifically think about those transfer payments that are needs-based. In the United States, that would be Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicaid, temporary assistance to needy family, food stamps, things like that. And unemployment compensation, things like that. Those needs-based programs. And so as the economy grows, the number of people qualifying for those needs-based programs should be declining, and that's why we have this going down. And by the way, I'm just drawing it conceptually so that we can easily see some of the points that we're going to make. And as that economy gets worse, hey, the government outlays goes up, and you should have a vertical orientation, okay? And I'll go through that in just a second. As you look at this graph, again, vertical orientation, and let me get into that right now. So what's interesting is the intersection of these two lines doesn't have to do with full employment or actual output. The intersection is just where the budget would be balanced. And what I'm showing is an economy, a budget, a government budget that has been constructed in such a way that we're running a deficit when we're at full employment. In fact, we would have to be booming for us to get to a balanced budget. And the reason I'm drawing it that way is that's how our budget today has been constructed, okay? We have what is called a structural deficit. The budget has been constructed or structured in such a way that we run a deficit even if we're at full employment. And so this vertical distance is the size of the deficit, right? Because at full employment, this vertical distance right there, not sure if I got it aligned well, but that would be the government outlays, right? And that would be the tax revenues. So of course, that would be the deficit, or let me do it this way. That would be the deficit, which is our structural deficit. Now, if you fall into a recession, For one thing you see is those tax revenues declining, right? Here's our tax revenues, and now they're going to be less. They've actually declined by that amount, which we generally think from an economic theory standpoint, that's a good thing. That's providing stability. Why? Because as those tax revenues go down, that is stimulative. That's the deficit getting bigger, and the size of the deficit is how much stimulation we're doing. This is leaving more money with people, basically, okay? That's what it's doing, is it's leaving more money with people, or at least we're taking less tax money away, allowing them to spend more, okay? So that part right there, we call part of the cyclical deficit. This particular part is the part of the cyclical deficit associated with tax revenues declining. And as we fall into that recession, the transfer payments go up, okay? So the government's outlays are made up of government purchases or government spending plus the transfer payments. We're only focused really on the transfer payments that are needs-based. That's the part that automatically changes when the economy, real GDP, changes. We fall into that recession, those transfer payments go up, and you get this portion of the cyclical deficit. Let me go through that again. This red thing right here, that line over full employment, that's the structural deficit. You can see the deficit increasing, so the actual or total deficit has now increased significantly to there. We still have our structural deficit, but we now have this and this added on. This is the portion of our cyclical deficit that's coming from the fall in tax revenues. The other portion of our cyclical deficit that's coming from our increase in our needs-based program. These two portions of the cyclical deficit make up the total cyclical deficit. You add that to the structural and you have the actual deficit. Again, what this is showing is that we get more stimulative in our fiscal policy as we fall into a recession. This happens automatically, okay? We call these non-discretionary policies. Non-discretionary policies. Our policymakers don't have to act with discretion. They don't need to go in and pass a bill. This will automatically happen based on the way that our budget is set up, based on the fact that our taxes come from income and payrolls and profits and sales, okay? And based on the fact that some of our transfer payments are needs-based. So automatically these things happen, and this is good because they provide counter-cyclical forces. When we're busting, they're going to moderate that, okay, by being counter-cyclical. When we're busting, they're becoming more stimulative to, instead of diving down so deep, it should make that deep dive shallower. And when we're booming, it should cool the economy down. Instead of booming so much, it should cool it down, right? It should become more restrictive again as we boom. Just to let you see that, you can see if we boomed, went above full employment, you can see the size of that deficit decreasing as long as you have that vertical orientation. You see that deficit decreasing, and heck, if we boomed enough, we could get into a situation of surplus, which is clearly a time that the fiscal policy is actually contractionary. These are automatic stabilizers. These are non-discretionary policies. Policymakers don't have to pass a bill for them to happen. And what they're going to do is they're going to moderate the business cycle. This is not what we call self-correction. This is not what we call self-correction. Don't confuse it with self-correction. See it as stabilizing forces, things that moderate the booms and the busts. Instead of the bust being so big, instead of the bust being as big, they're going to be a little less big. Instead of the booms being as big, they're going to be a little less big, right? They're moderating the booms and the busts, providing some stability for our economy. They have to do with the way our budget is constructed. Therefore, they are associated with fiscal policies. They are non-discretionary fiscal policies, automatic stabilizers. I hope that made sense to you. See you in the next video.